what if the true spirit of Christmas came from the most unexpected places? In a small, forgotten corner of a snow-covered town, a struggling single mother and her two young children face a Christmas like no other. With no food and no hope, will the holiday magic be enough to turn their lives around? Or will it take something, or someone, extraordinary to bring the Christmas miracle they so desperately need? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like, and share with your friends and family. Every little act of kindness counts. Let's spread the magic of Christmas together. Leave a comment below and let us know how you plan to make someone's holiday special this season. In a quiet, snow-covered town, where Christmas lights twinkled in every window but one, there's a lonely little house hidden at the end of a narrow alley. It looks worn and tired, with a roof weighed down by years of neglect and fresh snow. Behind its cold, frosted windows lives Clara, a young mother whose once bright smile has faded under the weight of hard times. Life wasn't always this way for Clara. Just 2 years ago, her home was filled with warmth and laughter, especially when her husband Thomas was alive. His presence made everything feel safe and hopeful. But when a sudden illness took him away, everything changed. Left with 2 young children to care for and no steady income, Clara found herself alone, facing a world that felt colder and more unforgiving every day. Now it's Christmas Eve, a night when the town hums with life. The streets glow with festive lights, and cheerful voices sing carols in the distance. Families gather around tables, overflowing with food, their homes filled with warmth and joy. But inside Clara's house, there's only silence, no decorations, no laughter, just the soft crackle of a dying fire and the chill of an empty home. Her children, Lily, a curious and hopeful 7-year-old with big dreams, and Ben, her quiet 4-year-old who clings to her like a shadow, lie curled up in their shared bed. The blankets are thin and worn, but they don't complain. Hunger has become a familiar feeling, something they've learned to endure. As Clara tucks the blanket tighter around them, Lily looks up with wide, hopeful eyes. Her voice is small, but filled with innocent wonder. "Mommy, do you think Santa will bring us a Christmas dinner?" Clara's heart aches at the question. She forces a soft smile, brushing a stray curl from Lily's forehead. "Tomorrow will be better," she whispers gently, her voice steady but fragile. "I promise." Lily's eyes flutter closed, and soon she's lost in a dream. A beautiful dream where their table is filled with warm bread, steaming soup, and the sweet scent of cinnamon. In her dream, Christmas is just as it should be, full of warmth, love, and enough food to fill their bellies. Clara watches her children sleep, their small faces peaceful, despite the ache of hunger. She sits silently by their side, pressing a hand to her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. In the quiet, a single tear escapes and slides down her cheek. Outside, the town sparkles with joy and celebration. But here, in this forgotten corner, Christmas feels distant, like a star shining far away, just out of reach. In the heart of the town, where the snow gently dusted the cobblestone streets, a small group of stray animals had come together, forming an unlikely family. Though the world often overlooked them, these animals shared a bond that was rare. They didn't belong to anyone, but they belonged to each other. At the head of this family was Max, a scruffy but strong dog. His dark, intelligent eyes always scanned the world around him, watching over his friends. Max wasn't just any stray dog. He was a leader, with instincts that guided him through the hardest of times. He had learned the streets well, and it was this wisdom that made him the protector of the group. Then there was Whiskers, a clever tabby cat with a curiosity that often led her into tricky situations. But it was this same curiosity that made her invaluable to the team. Whiskers could sneak into places unnoticed, find things others might miss, and her sharp wit always got them out of tight spots. Pip, a small but spirited squirrel, was the heart of the group. Though timid at times, Pip's eagerness to help his friends made him brave when it mattered most. His bright eyes and bouncy tail were a sign of his kind, generous spirit. Finally, there was Rosie, a wise pigeon who had been living in the town long before the others arrived. Her soft gray feathers blended perfectly with the sky, and from her perch high above, she could see everything that unfolded below. Rosie had a gentle nature and a nurturing instinct, always looking after her friends and keeping an eye on the town's happenings. On this cold Christmas Eve, as the town bustled with the sounds of festive cheer, Max felt something unusual. It wasn't the normal chill of winter or the usual smell of food filling the air. This time it was different. His sharp instincts kicked in, and something deep inside told him that there was more to the night than just the quiet beauty of snowflakes falling. As he listened closely, his ears picked up something faint, almost unheard, a soft sob, barely audible, but unmistakable. It came from the alley where Clara and her children lived. Max's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the pain in the air, a deep ache that wasn't his own. It was hunger, real, desperate hunger. Without hesitation, Max turned to his friends. His eyes were serious, his voice low, but filled with determination. "Something's wrong. I can feel it. Someone out there needs our help." Whiskers, ever curious, tilted her head and patted closer. "What is it, Max? What's going on?" Max's eyes were fixed on the direction of the cries. "It's Clara and her kids. They're struggling. They haven't eaten in days. They're cold and alone. And tonight, we're going to change that." Pip, always a bit anxious, hopped nervously on his tiny feet. "How are we supposed to help them? We're just, well, us." Max's voice was calm but strong. "We may be small, but together, we can do anything. We know where the food is. We know how to find what they need. Tonight, we won't be thinking about ourselves. We'll think about them." Rosie fluttered down from the rooftops, landing gracefully beside the group. "I've seen them too. Clara, Lily, and Ben. They've been through so much. I've watched them from above. It's heartbreaking to see them so hungry. We can help. I know we can." Max nodded, his tail wagging gently. "Exactly. We'll bring them everything they need. We'll give them a Christmas they'll never forget. This is our chance to do something good, something that matters." The group fell silent for a moment, each of them feeling the weight of Max's words. There was no hesitation now. They were in this together, and they wouldn't stop until they'd brought warmth and food to the family in need. With Max at the front, the small band of strays set off into the night. They moved swiftly, each of them focused on their mission. The streets that were often cold and unforgiving now seemed to open up to them, as though the town itself was guiding them toward their goal. Max led the way, his nose to the ground, his senses sharp. Whiskers darted ahead, her quick paws finding hidden treasures. Pip scurried along the branches of the nearby trees, looking for anything that might help. And Rosie, with her watchful eyes, kept a lookout from above, making sure no danger would interrupt their mission. They were a small group, but their hearts were large, filled with a purpose greater than any of them had ever known. Tonight, they weren't just strays. They were a family, united by the need to help another family. As they made their way through the town, the quiet of the night seemed to wrap around them like a blanket. The world was peaceful, unaware of the miracle that was about to unfold. But for the animals, the night was just beginning. They didn't know how the night would end, but they knew one thing for sure. They would do whatever it took to bring hope to the family that had none. And in their hearts, they carried a promise. This Christmas, no one would go hungry. The night air was cold, but the warmth of purpose kept the animals moving swiftly through the town. They had a mission that was bigger than themselves, one that would take all of them working together to make a difference. Max, the brave dog who had led them this far, felt the weight of their task in his heart. But he wasn't alone. His companions were just as determined, each ready to do their part to make sure this Christmas would be different for the family in the alley. Max knew where to start. He led the way to the bakery, its warm glow shining through the frosty window. He could already smell the sweet, yeasty scent of freshly baked bread drifting from the door, and his tail wagged in excitement. Max was used to the smell. It was something he'd come to look forward to over the years. Every night, the kind-hearted baker, Mr. Harris, would leave out the leftover bread for the stray animals. Max padded up to the door and sat, his ears perked, his eyes trained on the bakery. A soft bark escaped him, gentle but persistent. Mr. Harris, an elderly man with a heart of gold, looked up from his work. His face softened when he saw the familiar face of the stray dog outside. "Well, well," Mr. Harris said with a chuckle. "You again. Hungry, are we?" Without a second thought, he grabbed a few loaves of warm bread and placed them on the ground for Max. The dog's eyes gleamed with gratitude as he grabbed the loaves, his mouth full of the soft, delicious bread. Max looked up at Mr. Harris, his tail wagging enthusiastically. The baker patted his head gently. "Take what you need, old friend. Share it with your pack." With the bread secured, Max trotted off, eager to continue their journey. He had a feeling this Christmas was going to be one to remember. Not far away, Whiskers, the clever and agile tabby cat, was working her own magic. She was headed toward the back entrance of the local restaurant, where the owner, Chef Daniels, often left scraps for the strays. Whiskers knew the back door was usually left open, and she used her small size to slip inside unnoticed. She crept silently into the kitchen, her soft paws making no sound on the tiled floor. The rich, mouth-watering smell of stew filled the air, and Whiskers' stomach rumbled. She padded up to the chef, who was stirring a large pot of stew on the stove. Chef Daniels, a burly man with a kind heart, looked down and smiled when he saw Whiskers. "Well, look who's here tonight. I've got something for you," he said, winking. Without hesitation, he scooped up a generous portion of stew, carefully ladling it into a basket. "Take this. You and your friends look like you could use a warm meal." Whiskers purred softly, pleased with the chef's generosity. She took the basket in her mouth and slipped back out into the night, eager to reunite with Max and the others, one step closer to their goal. Meanwhile, Pip, the small but spirited squirrel, had his own mission. He darted through the snowy streets to the local grocery store. Mrs. Bennett, the store owner, always left scraps for the birds. Pip had learned over the years that if he was quick and careful, he could gather a bit of food from the leftovers. Tonight, however, he wasn't just collecting a few crumbs. He had his eyes set on a prize. As he neared the back door of the store, he saw a pile of apples, carrots, and vegetables. Just the kinds of things that would make the family in the alley feel nourished and warm. Pip wasted no time. He gathered as much as his tiny paws could carry and dashed back into the night, his heart racing with excitement. He had everything they needed, fresh fruit and vegetables that would bring some color and life to the table. Up above, Rosie, the motherly pigeon, was soaring high over the town. Her wings cut through the crisp night air as she headed straight for the town square. where carolers were gathered. The festive atmosphere was full of warmth and joy, and Rosia had a special task ahead. In the middle of the carolers was a young child, no older than 6, standing next to a table with cookies and milk set out for Santa. Rosie fluttered down gently, landing on the table where the child was standing. The child's eyes widened with delight when they saw the pigeon. "Here, little bird," the child said, holding out a cookie with a smile. Rosie delicately took the cookie in her beak, and the child giggled. "I think Santa will love you," the child said. And with that, Rosie flew off, a cookie and a small glass of milk in her talons. She couldn't help but smile as she made her way back to meet the others. The treats she had gathered were the perfect finishing touch to their meal. There was nothing like the magic of Christmas cookies and milk to bring a sense of festivity and cheer to a holiday meal. As they each made their way back to the rendezvous point, the animals couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had faced challenges along the way: slippery ice, wary humans, and even a close call with a grumpy guard dog. But nothing could stop them. They had their mission, and they wouldn't give up. Max, Whiskers, Pip, and Rosie had worked together, each using their unique talents, and now they had gathered everything they needed to bring food and joy to the family in need. The animals knew they were not just giving food. They were giving hope. They were showing that even in the toughest of times, kindness could still shine through. And as they made their way through the town, their hearts were filled with warmth, knowing that their actions would make this Christmas a little brighter for someone who needed it the most. The mission was not over yet, but they were one step closer. And with each step, they could feel the power of their small but mighty act of kindness growing stronger. This Christmas, the animals were giving more than food. They were giving a message of love, hope, and the spirit of togetherness that would last far beyond this snowy night. The animals gathered in the alley, their hearts full of pride, as they looked over their collection of food. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a peaceful quiet in the air. There were loaves of bread, bowls of warm stew, fresh apples and vegetables, and even cookies and milk. Each of them had played a part in gathering this bounty, and it was more than just food. It was a symbol of hope, a promise of a better tomorrow for Clara and her children. But as they began to celebrate their success, something unusual happened. Max, ever alert, noticed a shadowy figure watching them from the corner. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the familiar form of old Mr. Grayson. Known throughout the town for his grumpy demeanor, Mr. Grayson was infamous for shooing away stray animals with his cane, and Max had been on the receiving end of that more than once. The animals froze, Whiskers tensed, her fur bristling, while Pip instinctively scurried behind Rosie, hoping to stay out of sight. They all knew Mr. Grayson's reputation, and they expected trouble. But instead of the usual harsh words or the swing of his cane, something different happened. Slowly the old man shuffled forward, his stiff legs groaning as he knelt down, his eyes softening. "I've seen you all night," Grayson said, his voice rough but gentle. "You're not just scavenging for yourselves, are you?" His tired eyes seemed to study them, his face a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that surprised the animals. Max, ever the leader, stepped forward cautiously. His eyes met Grayson's, and for a moment, they both stood in silence, as though measuring each other. Grayson didn't look angry. In fact, his face seemed worn, like someone who had lived a long life, but had forgotten the warmth of companionship. There was a sadness in his eyes, a kind of loneliness that the animals could sense. Grayson started, then paused. "I've been alone since my wife passed away," he said quietly, almost to himself. "This town's been empty without her. I've pushed away everything and everyone, But seeing you all tonight, I see something I haven't seen in a long time." Max tilted his head slightly confused. Grayson sighed deeply, as if sharing a burden he had kept hidden for far too long. "You've reminded me of something I forgot. Something I thought was gone. The spirit of Christmas, it's not about just getting. It's about giving. And you've shown me that. Maybe I can still make a difference." The old man's hands, gnarled with age, reached into his coat and pulled out a small basket, one he had clearly prepared for himself. But instead of eating it alone, he extended it toward the animals. "Here," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Let me help you. I might not have much, but I have something left in me tonight. Let me help you carry this food to the family." Max felt a shift in the air, something almost magical. The rough edges of Mr. Grayson's personality seemed to soften. He wasn't the same grumpy man the animals had always known. He wasn't just an obstacle, he was another soul, just as hungry for connection as the rest of them. And in that moment, Max knew they weren't alone in this. The mission had brought them all together. The animals, Clara, and even Mr. Grayson. With a careful nod, Max stepped aside, allowing Grayson to take his place among them. Together, they set off down the quiet street, the food carefully balanced in their arms. The snow, now soft and still, glittered under the moonlight as they walked through the empty town. The streets were silent, but this silence felt different. It wasn't the stillness of cold indifference. It was the kind of stillness that signified something more, something deeper. As they made their way through the town, the animals couldn't help but notice how the simple act of sharing food, of reaching out to others, was slowly transforming everyone involved. Clara would wake up tomorrow to a table filled with food, a table she never thought would be there. And Mr. Grayson, the old man who had shut himself off from the world, had found his way back to it. In helping the animals, he had helped himself more than he realized. When they finally reached Clara's house, they gently set the food down at the doorstep, just out of sight, and stood back, waiting in quiet satisfaction. The house was dark, but they could see the faint outlines of the children through the window, their bodies curled up in bed, their faces pale from hunger. Grayson stood back, quietly watching the scene. He didn't speak, but there was a deep, quiet understanding between him and the animals. They had all come together for one reason, and that reason had nothing to do with the food itself. It was the spirit behind it, the willingness to help someone else, to share what little they had, and to remind each other of the kindness that still existed in the world. And as the animals turned to leave, they knew that the true meaning of Christmas wasn't just in the presents or the food. It was in the connections they had made, the kindness they had shared, and the lives they had touched. They had given something far more precious than food. They had given hope. As they disappeared into the snowy night, Mr. Grayson stood alone on the street, his eyes focused on the house, where Clara and her children slept. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel so alone. Maybe Christmas was about more than just giving and receiving. It was about healing, about finding a way back to each other. And in that moment, he knew that something beautiful had been born from a simple act of kindness. Tomorrow, everything would change. It was early Christmas morning, and the world outside Clara's small home was blanketed in a peaceful, wintry stillness. The soft light of dawn began to creep through the frosted window, casting gentle shadows across the room. Clara lay wrapped in her thin blanket, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, her thoughts wandering aimlessly as she tried to ignore the aching hunger that gnawed at her. But then, a soft scratching sound at the door broke the silence. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper in the quiet of the morning. Clara rubbed her eyes, puzzled. wondering who could possibly be at the door at this hour. She shuffled out of bed, her feet dragging on the cold floor, and opened the door, half expecting another empty morning. But what she found outside made her heart stop. Standing there right before her were Max, Whiskers, Pip, and Rosie, the four animals she had grown fond of over the past weeks. But they weren't alone. Beside them, with a humble and gentle smile on his face, was none other than Mr. Grayson, the grumpy old man she had often seen in the neighborhood. He was carrying a large basket filled with food. Clara blinked, unsure whether her eyes were deceiving her. For a moment, she could hardly believe what she was seeing. There, on her doorstep, was a Christmas miracle, one that she never expected. The animals, the man who had once seemed so distant and cold, all standing together with a gift that would change everything. Max, with his tail wagging gently, looked up at her, as though he knew exactly what this moment meant. Whiskers, ever the curious one, sat calmly by his side, her green eyes shining with warmth. Pip, the little squirrel, hopped around in excitement, unable to contain his joy, while Rosie fluttered her wings, cooing softly as she perched nearby. And then there was Grayson, his weathered face softer than Clara had ever seen it, as he stepped forward, holding the basket out to her, with an unspoken understanding in his eyes. Clara stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say, her mind racing to comprehend the scene before her. All she could do was kneel slowly to Max's level, her hand trembling as she placed it gently on his head. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she whispered almost to herself, How did this happen?" Grayson, with a kindness that seemed to surprise even himself, spoke up. "Sometimes Christmas miracles come in fur and feathers," he said quietly, his voice carrying a depth of meaning that Clara felt in her bones. His words were simple, but they held more truth than she could have ever imagined. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. She thought about everything she had been through, the loneliness, the struggle, the endless nights of wondering if things would ever get better. And yet here they were, these animals, this man, offering more than just food. They were offering something priceless: hope, companionship, and love. With a shaky breath, Clara reached out to take the basket from Grayson. The sight of the food nearly took her breath away. Loaves of bread, a pot of warm stew, fresh apples, vegetables, and even cookies and milk. It was more than she could have ever hoped for, more than she could have imagined receiving. But it wasn't just the food that moved her. It was the love behind it, the kindness that had brought these unlikely gifts into her life. Together, the animals and Grayson began to set up a makeshift Christmas feast in the modest kitchen. As they worked, Clara could hear the faint sounds of Lily and Ben waking up. The aroma of warm food filled the air, and the children's sleepy murmurs soon turned into excited giggles as they smelled the feast that awaited them. The joy in their voices made Clara's heart swell with a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude. Lily was the first to notice the animals. She blinked sleepily and rubbed her eyes before looking around the room. When she saw Max wagging his tail, Whiskers purring softly, and Pip hopping about excitedly, her face lit up with wonder. Ben, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, followed her gaze and saw the food. The sight of the baskets and bowls of steaming food made his eyes grow wide in amazement. Clara watched as her children, who had known hunger too well, reached for the food. Their faces, once shadowed with worry, were now filled with the pure joy of a Christmas morning, like none they had ever experienced. The warmth of the meal, the companionship of the animals, and the unexpected kindness of Mr. Grayson transformed the room into a place of light and love. Max's tail wagged as he sat patiently, watching the children eat. Rosie flapped her wings, cooing gently as if to say, "This is what Christmas is all about." Whiskers hopped up onto the table, nudging a loaf of bread toward the children, while Pip danced around in circles, his joy infectious. Even Grayson, who had always kept his distance from others, seemed to soften in the glow of the moment. Lily reached for a cookie, her small hands trembling with excitement. "It smells so good," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. Ben, too, picked up a piece of bread and took a small bite. "It's the best thing I've ever had," he said, his eyes sparkling with happiness. The house, once cold and dark, now felt like a home. The laughter of children, the warmth of a shared meal, the presence of animals that had become family. This was the true spirit of Christmas. Clara sat back and watched her children eat, her heart full. She knew in that moment that this would be a Christmas they would never forget. And as the animals settled down, content and happy, Clara looked at Grayson, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what to say." Grayson smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that we're all in this together." And in that moment, Clara realized that no matter what had happened in the past, no matter how dark the days had seemed, she would never be alone again. The love and kindness they had shared today would last long beyond this Christmas day. The small room, once filled with sadness, now buzzed with warmth, laughter, and the undeniable sense of love. Clara looked around her humble home, where, against all odds, kindness had come to their door in the form of old Mr. Grayson, the animals, and the spirit of the season. Grayson, the man who had once dismissed the strays, had now shared in this simple Christmas miracle. She realized that kindness truly could come from the most unexpected places, and the world could still surprise her in the best ways. As Clara glanced at her children, her heart filled with love. It was overwhelming to see them smiling, their bellies full, and their hearts at peace. Something she hadn't dared dream of in a long while. It wasn't the riches of the world that mattered. It was the love that filled the spaces between them, the togetherness they shared. For Clara, that was more than enough. Her voice, thick with emotion, broke the quiet as she gazed at her children. "We may not have much, but we have each other," she said softly, "and that's more than enough." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth that Clara could feel deep in her soul. They had each other, and that was everything. Grayson, standing nearby, and moved by the strength Clara had shown, stepped forward. He had witnessed her struggles, her sacrifices, and her unwavering spirit. His heart had softened, and he wanted to help. "Clara, I've seen how hard you've worked. I know things have been tough, but I'd like to help. I'll talk to a few people, see if I can find work for you. There's a brighter future ahead for you and the kids. I know it." Clara looked up at Grayson, her eyes filled with surprise and gratitude. She hadn't expected anything from him, but his words touched her deeply. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling the weight of his kindness. "Thank you so much." Grayson nodded, his expression kind. He gave Clara a reassuring smile before turning to leave, knowing that his part in the miracle was done. The animals, too, had completed their mission. Max, Whiskers, Pip, and Rosie, silent heroes in their own right, had done what they set out to do. Their small acts of kindness had brought about something beautiful. Before they left, Max gave Clara a gentle nudge with his nose, as if to say goodbye. The animals trotted off, each heading to their familiar spots in the town, knowing that their work had made a difference. They had no need for recognition or thanks, just the satisfaction of knowing they had been part of something greater than themselves. As Clara watched the animals disappear into the morning light, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, her heart felt light. She had her children, her health, and her faith restored in the kindness of others. The world, she realized, was not such a dark place after all. The camera lingered on Max, Whiskers, Pip, and Rosie, perched high on a fence, gazing back at Clara and her children, a quiet sense of fulfillment in their eyes. They had quietly brought light to the lives of a family in need. Watching from afar, they knew they had done their part. And now, it was time to let the warmth of their actions spread through the town. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful journey of kindness and hope. Remember, it's the small acts of love that make the biggest difference. If you were moved by this story, make sure to subscribe for more inspiring tales, and don't forget to share the love with those who need it most. Until next time, keep spreading joy, and may your heart be as full as this Christmas feast. See you in the next one.